For the first time ever, a Chinese rocket has come back from the edge of space, deployed its landing legs, and actually stood there on the ground. China just made its first land-based recovery of an orbital-class rocket. So how does this compare to SpaceX's reusable rocket landings? And could this be the beginning of China catching up in a field SpaceX has pretty much dominated for years? And later, we'll also take a look at some of the latest pictures of the SpaceX Starship that has been floating out at sea for almost a month now. So stick around to the end, because there's a lot to unpack. Yesterday, from the Zhuque Satellite Launch Center, the Zhuque-3 Y2 reusable rocket lifted off for a flight test. And almost immediately, you can see pieces of insulation falling away from the vehicle. But don't worry, that was expected. As the rocket climbed, some of the insulation was designed to break away. Basically, Zhuque-3 was doing a little bit of spring cleaning at 76 meters per second. Now, what exactly is this rocket? Zhuque-3 is a new orbital-class reusable rocket developed by Landspace, a Chinese commercial spaceflight company based in Beijing. And this thing is seriously big. 76.6 meters tall, 4.5 meters wide, weighs around 660 tons at liftoff, and produces roughly 900 tons of thrust. Its first stage is powered by 9 TQ-12B liquid oxygen methane engines, while the second stage uses a single TQ-15B vacuum engine. Together, they give Zhuque-3 enough performance to carry up to 21.3 tons to low Earth orbit in a standard mission, or around 18.3 tons when the first stage has to save enough fuel to come back. So yes, unlike a traditional expendable rocket, Zhuque-3 is designed to recover and reuse its first stage. It has 4 sets of deployable grid fins to help steer the booster during its descent, along with landing legs at the bottom for the final touchdown. Landspace says the first stage is designed to be reused at least 20 times. So, a stainless steel rocket, liquid oxygen and methane engines, grid fins, landing legs, and a reusable first stage. That combination sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Anyway, after about 137 seconds of flight, the first and second stages separated. The second stage continued toward orbit, carrying the Honghu 03 satellite developed by Hongqing Technology. And while the second stage went off to finish its job, the first stage had to do something considerably more stressful: turn around and come back. At around 7:43 a.m., the booster reached the Zhuque-3 landing site in Minqin County, Gansu Province, and successfully performed a soft landing using its engines and landing legs. And that touchdown is the part that makes this mission especially important. This was China's first recovery of an orbital-class rocket's first stage using landing legs, as well as the country's first land-based recovery of an orbital-class launch vehicle's first stage. So Zhuque-3 didn't just launch a satellite and disappear over the horizon. It went up, delivered its payload, turned around, and landed back on Earth. Now, after watching Zhuque-3 come back and land, you might be wondering, is this actually different from how SpaceX lands their rockets? Or are they basically doing the same thing? Well, even though it looks like they're doing a lot of similar stuff, but getting a rocket to land itself is much harder than it looks. Think about what a rocket is being asked to do. At liftoff, it needs to be powerful enough to throw hundreds of tons of hardware into space. A few minutes later, that same giant metal tube has to turn around, survive re-entry, steer itself through the atmosphere, and gently land on a relatively small patch of ground. There are 4 major challenges. First is precision guidance. After the first stage separates, the rocket has to constantly calculate where it is, where it's going, and where it needs to land. At extremely high speeds, even a small navigation error can eventually turn into a landing error of kilometers. So the computer is continuously adjusting the flight path instead of simply pointing the rocket toward the landing site and hoping for the best. Then there's attitude control. A rocket isn't naturally very good at balancing itself. It's tall, heavy, and has a large surface area for the atmosphere to push against. During descent, grid fins, small RCS thrusters, and the engines themselves all work together to keep the booster pointed in the right direction. Then comes deceleration, which is probably the part everyone notices. The rocket has a limited amount of propellant left, and there isn't much room for mistakes. Start the landing burn too early and you waste precious fuel. Start too late and congratulations, you've just invented a very expensive crater. The engines therefore have to ignite at exactly the right moment and produce exactly the right amount of thrust to bring the vehicle's velocity down to almost zero just as the landing legs reach the ground. And finally, there's the environment itself. High-altitude winds can be extremely strong, and the rocket has to react to those changes incredibly quickly. Sensors measure the vehicle's position and movement, computers process that information, and the flight control system commands the engines and aerodynamic surfaces to correct the trajectory. Basically, the rocket has to be powerful enough to reach space, but gentle enough to land like it's made of glass. To make all of this work, several technologies have to work together. First, you need throttleable engines that can turn down, restart, and adjust their thrust, basically letting the rocket use its engines as brakes. Then there's flight control. Grid fins steer through the atmosphere, RCS thrusters handle smaller adjustments, and the engines can gimbal for bigger ones. The flight computer pulls data from GPS, inertial sensors, and other systems to constantly figure out where the rocket is and where it needs to go, while backup systems help keep things under control when something inevitably goes wrong. And finally, the rocket itself has to survive launch, re-entry heating, and landing without falling apart. Because if it's supposed to be reusable, surviving once is really only the beginning. That's why Zhuque-3 and SpaceX's Falcon 9. At the most basic level, their recovery strategy is very similar. Both launch vertically, separate the first stage, turn the booster around, use engines to control its descent, deploy grid fins for aerodynamic steering, and perform a final powered landing onto deployable legs. Basically, launch, separate, turn around, survive re-entry, steer, fire the engines, and land. There are really not many other effective ways to do it. However, Falcon 9 uses LOX and RP1, essentially liquid oxygen and rocket-grade kerosene with Merlin engines. Zhuque-3 uses liquid oxygen and methane, powering its Tianche engines. For the structure, Falcon 9 uses an aluminum-lithium alloy, while Zhuque-3 uses stainless steel. There are also differences in how the boosters return. Falcon 9 can perform a boost back burn when it needs to return toward the launch site. Depending on the mission, it can land back at a ground pad or travel much farther downrange and land on one of SpaceX's autonomous drone ships. Zhuque-3's recovery strategy is more focused on land-based landing zones, particularly downrange from its inland launch site. The landing burns also aren't necessarily identical. Falcon 9 can use different engine combinations depending on the mission and how much energy the booster has left. Zhuque-3 uses its own engine burn sequence and flight profile, including atmospheric aerodynamic flight controlled by its grid fins and RCS before the final landing burn. So, are Zhuque-3 and Falcon 9 doing the same thing? At the big picture level, yes. They're both using the same basic concept. Instead of throwing the first stage away, control it all the way back to Earth and land it vertically under engine power. But the hardware, engines, materials, flight software, recovery locations, and exact flight profiles are different. And there's one enormous difference that really matters: experience. Let's say you own a car. You drive it 500 kilometers. Everything goes perfectly, and you park it safely in your driveway. Great, the car works. But does that prove you can drive it another 500 kilometers tomorrow? Not necessarily. You still need to check the engine, transmission, brakes, tires, suspension, chassis, basically everything that just spent several hours doing its job. Rockets get a little more complicated than that. After a rocket lands, engineers need to inspect it and figure out what happened during the flight. Did the engines handle the stress? Did the structure deform? Did the heat damage anything? Do parts need to be replaced? And just as importantly, how long does all of that take, and how much does it cost? If recovering a rocket means spending 3 months inspecting it and millions of dollars replacing half the vehicle, then reusability starts to lose its appeal. But if engineers can inspect it quickly, replace only a few parts, and get it ready to fly again in a matter of days or weeks, that's a completely different story. SpaceX successfully landed a Falcon 9 first stage in 2015, but landing the booster was only the beginning. The really important milestone came in 2017, when SpaceX launched a previously flown booster for the first time. That was the moment the industry got something much more valuable than a cool landing video. It got proof that this isn't just a rocket that can land, it's a rocket that can actually fly again. And SpaceX kept doing it. The same basic process was repeated over and over. Recover the booster, inspect it, refurbish it, launch it again, and recover it again. Eventually, booster reuse stopped being a special event and became a normal part of Falcon 9 operations. And that's the path Zhuque-3 now has to follow. The successful landing is absolutely significant because Landspace has demonstrated that an orbital-class first stage can launch, separate, survive re-entry, restart its engines, and land vertically on its legs. But that's only step one, because ultimately, reusable rocketry isn't really about whether you can land a rocket. We already know that's possible. The real question is, can you land the same rocket, get it ready again without spending a fortune, and send it back to space before everyone gets bored waiting? That's what will determine whether Zhuque-3 becomes not just a reusable rocket, but a commercially successful one. Now, to wrap things up, let's talk about a rocket that landed almost a month ago, but is still making headlines. Ship 40, the upper stage of Starship's Flight 13, completed something SpaceX had never done before. It survived an intact ocean splashdown. After launching from Starbase in South Texas on July 24th, Ship 40 re-entered and landed in the Indian Ocean as planned. Normally, that would be the end of the story. Except this time, the spacecraft didn't explode. Instead, it was still sitting there, 171 feet tall, waiting for SpaceX's recovery team to figure out how to bring the giant thing home. That turned out to be much harder than expected. For 24 days, the team dealt with rough seas and difficult conditions, and at one point, it wasn't even clear whether they could recover the vehicle safely. But now, Ship 40 has reached calmer waters just offshore of Christmas Island. And yes, that is the same Christmas Island famous for its roughly 40 million red crabs marching toward the ocean every year. So apparently, Starship has accidentally joined one of nature's strangest traffic jams. SpaceX engineers are now heading to the vehicle to inspect it before attempting to return it to Starbase. Because Ship 40 is the first Starship upper stage to fly into space and come back in one piece. That means SpaceX suddenly has something incredibly valuable. A real, flight-tested Starship sitting in the ocean, ready to be studied. Engineers can now examine its heat shield, structure, hydraulics, aerodynamics, and other systems up close. So Ship 40 may have completed its flight weeks ago, but its most useful mission might have only just begun. That's it, guys. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like and subscribe for more updates, stories, and interesting stuff happening in spaceflight. See you in the next one!